This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
I'd like to call our February 21st meeting to order. We do have a full agenda. We have 4 different departments workshops after this meeting. First item, minutes of meeting from January 17th. Everyone's had a chance to look at it, review it. Any questions or comments to those minutes? Hearing none, could I have a motion to accept the minutes as presented?
I could do that.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Really, there's no old business. We do have the workshops dealing with the budget for 18-19 right after this meeting. New business expenditures? Questions? Revenue?
I just have general revenue questions after we look at these reports for the first selectman.
Something else on revenue? Board of Ed? Which we're getting some information that Michael and Diane requested that we still didn't get from the Board of Ed.
Yeah, the cafeteria accounts, remember?
Okay. Do ask them for that again.
Yep.
And special funds.
Rich, I think they said they'll have their budget to us by the end of the week.
End of this week?
Who's that, Board of Ed?
Board of Ed?
Yeah. If not the latest Monday.
Okay.
On the special funds, I just wanted to thank Mr. Swinkowski for the additional lines on that report. Thank you.
Oh, just so it's clear, it's all there now, so.
If there's no other comments or questions, can I have a motion to accept the reports as presented?
Make the motion.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Public comment before we do start our workshop. Art, I'm sorry, you had something.
Right. The state sent over a report recently updating us, or they didn't send it, it came from CCM, as it always does, regarding the expected revenues from the state of Connecticut. And I just wanted to know if either Mr. Swinkowski or Mr. Frieda would like to update us on the status of state funding in the current fiscal year.
So I'll start, Ed, feel free to
Yeah.
follow up. So we received the latest numbers from the state, and it's about $5,867,000, which is 61 or 67,000 less than what we had anticipated. So these numbers are changing every other week. And what we're faced with is this $1,445,000 that we have gotten in the past. We're scheduled to get this fiscal year, and now they tell us we may get it next year, even after I've said here at public meetings that we're not getting it. And we try to give information in a real-time fashion, but the information we're getting from the state continues to change. Now, Ed had a conversation today with the state, and they told us that even though you're scheduled to get it this year, don't count on it. So if they're saying that for this year, we may not get it,
Right.
even though we anticipate it. And now they're saying we're going to get it next year. We have a big decision to make as to whether we factor it in or we don't factor it in. Now, keep in mind, this $1,445,000 is strictly for public works. That's all we can use it for. And we have to have waivers sent to the state for different items beyond regular streets and roads. Ed?
Right, yeah, I think every year we send a letter to them saying, certifying that the money is gonna be used for public works items, streets and roads, and that sort of expenditure. And if we wanna do anything with equipment or anything else, we just have to get a waiver to okay it, an authorization. And it all has to be public works related.
So if we were putting together this budget tonight to go to a referendum in a couple of weeks, we'd have to use the numbers that the state has given us, which is $5,867,000. That's the last report. So, coming back to the information in real-time fashion, I see Mary and Tom White just walked in. At the last meeting, I asked Mary and Tom off camera, do you like getting the information in real-time fashion, knowing that sometimes the information changes? And Tom said, yes, we like hearing the updates because it gives us, and I'm paraphrasing from what Tom White said, it gives us a feel for how the things are changing on a regular basis. So tonight, $5,867,000, but that could change. Mike, I hope that answered your question.
Well, it's sort of. First, we just might as well mention that you're right that one of the numbers has changed since the CCM report was issued February 6th, and that is the town aid road money, the TAR money, which, is that going to be withheld 50% or 100% in the
Right now, it's
current
Right, yeah,
fiscal
right
year,
now it's
right?
100.
100%. So let me comment on that, okay? 2 weeks ago, I received a phone call from the Commissioner of the Department of Transportation, asked me if I'd go to Newington to meet with him, and the issue of TAR and LOTCIP, L-O-T-C-I-P, which is another municipal fund that all of our municipalities get. These funds are designed to improve road conditions, drainage issues that we may have in public works. They're supplementary funds that we've had for years. Because the state transportation fund is broken, or broke, I should say, and there's a big debate whether there should be tolls, and there's a big debate where the governor is asking for 7 cents a gallon on the gasoline tax. We don't see us getting this, none of us at the municipal level, see us getting the TAR, Town Aid Road, and the local capital improvement fund. Ed?
Right. And just to comment on your numbers, Mike, that $5.8 million you were just mentioning includes TAR and LoCIP in it.
Yes.
Right. So it won't be that much.
No.
Well, but these are the numbers, this is my point.
Right.
These are the numbers they're telling us we're going to get. They're telling us we're going to get it, but then they're telling us we're not going to get it. It constantly changes. So for those watching on TV, the challenge is this. We're going to be putting together a budget where we're uncertain as to what the revenue is going to be from the state.
Right. And
That's all you can do.
Right.
yeah, so I just want to make clear that, I'm sort of asking these questions in a vacuum here, because at this point, when the budget is developed, so far we have the expense side of the budget that is before us, that we're working with, the draft. We, on this board, do not know at this time what projections or estimates or guesstimates that the finance department or anyone would like to, that's going to be added to the budget for the other side of the equation. So, and therefore, we have no idea how at this point, how taxes might be impacted yet.
Correct.
So, but we just have to more or less have a discussion about, at least mention it in February, because these numbers in this report are going to be presented to us in its entirety in March, at the March meeting.
Right.
The revenue side of the budget, we receive that, and that's when that's when the rubber meets the road. I just, more or less wanted to keep the public informed that the numbers do fluctuate, and I would probably agree with you that the bonded town aid of $1,445,000 probably should not be included on the revenue side of next year's, of the budget we're working on. Do you agree with that?
I'd like to,
Yeah, Ed.
I would include it only if I'm pretty sure I'm going to get the money this year. Then at least I'll have a buffer.
Yeah, well,
So that's an excellent point.
we have 30 days to figure out if we are going to get it this year.
So what Ed is saying is that if we get it this year, we have a buffer. If we put it in as revenue next year and don't get it, there's enough revenue to cover what we didn't get. That's what you're saying, right?
Right. Then I'd have the money that's been carried over plus the balance of
Right.
the $1.4 million from this year.
But if we don't get it this year, then
Tell
the
me a
an-
problem.
the an- the answer is
It is
no.
budgeting in the
Right.
dark. It's
Right.
sad.
Oh, yeah.
But it's what the state's done to us.
Now, the good news here, if there's any good news on this, folks, is that we're talking, for those that just came in, we're talking about what was once called MRSA, Municipal Revenue Sharing Account. Right now, we have about $1.3 million
Right.
left over. About 500 of that is probably going to be applied. History has shown about 500,000 of that comes out of the streets and roads lines in Public Works to apply those expenses against the balance. That would leave us with about 800,000 left over. And once again, it only can be used for Public Works. I think all of us on this board would agree that to take capital expenses out of the next budget that have already been presented to us, Public Works trucks that are desperately needed, we have the money now to spend, to buy that, to decrease the budget that was presented to us in fiscal year 2019. Does everyone understand that? We have the ability now to take capital expenses
Right,
out of
and
the budget.
that's gonna lead me to my next question about this year's bonded town aid, or what we have in our account for bonded town aid from past years, because we do have a balance of it, is it 1.6, or what's our?
1.3.
1.3 million, yeah. And I've asked this in prior meetings, but it's February, and I just want to know if there's any plans on using any of that toward capital in the current fiscal year.
Yes, we would like to do that. We have to request it from the state. But I think that we can definitely do that. I think everyone would be on board with that.
Right, I'd probably buy the first three things Public Works was looking for. Two of them together would probably total 50 or 60,000. They were cheaper, and one of the trucks to start. And later on in the year, ask for an additional truck, depending on if the money came in or not.
So what that means is whatever that cost is, that what Ed's just talking about, whatever the aggregate cost is, that reduces the upcoming year's budget that we're now working on tonight. That takes cost out of next year's budget.
Yes, and in accordance with the informal agreement we have, I hope you will notify this board about what is
Yes.
going to be requested from the state in terms of waivers
We-
or
we-
usage of of that account for capital purposes.
We committed to that,
You
and
know,
we'll do that.
Yeah, it's just so we can either ask questions or raise objections.
Sure.
Well, Mike, that would be the items that are asterisked on page 38. There's four of them there, probably three of the four.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Is that going to also affect the degree to which you use that account for operating expenses, either in the current year or maybe even next year?
Yeah, because in the current year, I've got to set aside $600,000 to offset current year expenses, which would leave $700,000 to work with on equipment.
If you
Based on what we
if you
have now.
choose to, in terms of what the shortages are from other state revenue accounts, usually we would use that account as a buffer in order to lower the expenses in the budget.
Yes.
That
Snow removal and such, yes.
that have to be applied to lower revenues, right?
Yeah, it would,
Matt?
what would happen is we would take expenses out of the current fiscal year's budget within the Public Works line item category, reduce those expenses, and apply either $500,000 or $600,000 to the $1.3 million we have designated for Public Works. That's what we would do. So we would, yes.
Oh, I follow. So I'm sure it's a little confusing to the public, but
It is.
I
It
do
is.
follow. But it's how we handle that account.
Right.
I understand.
Dictated to us by the state of Connecticut. This is what they have told us.
Right. And also, big picture wise, in the current fiscal year, regarding income and expenses, are there any more big variations that may have taken place in the last month? And I'm really thinking more about the Amazon building fees, because at one point the building size was going to be reduced, and now that it's not going to be reduced, is there an update in terms of what we think we're going to get in building fees in the current fiscal year?
Yes. The project has started, ground is broken, the construction people are on site. I've had several meetings with both the property owner and the development company Hillwood, and several conference calls with Amazon, and they've actually assigned a project manager to me as the liaison between Amazon Corporate and the town of North Haven. I anticipate sometime in March that there'll be anywhere from $1 million to $1.3 million in fees coming in from Amazon. And that's at the 50% reduction of the building permit fees, with no reduction on any fire associated fees as a result of that.
Do we know if that's happening before or after July 1st? Or
Before, in March, I'm saying, in March. We should be getting a check for anywhere from $1 million to $1.3. Now, we've estimated $1,850,000 in permit fees, okay? So if we come in at, let's say, $1.2 million with what happens, that gives us a nice flush of income to meet that $1,850,000 that we've budgeted for in revenue. And when we look at those aggregate line items, here's how Ed and I look at it. Even though we may be short one line item, that whole revenue item that you'd see in these reports, we'll be hitting that number. We'll definitely be hitting that aggregate revenue number. So.
That is good news, because we thought we were going to be short.
Right. So I want to just for the public's sake, okay? This has been a very complicated project with Amazon, and it's taken a lot of my time. If we didn't move forward with the previous design, we would have been out another 4 months or so before this project kicked off, because we would have to go back for state approvals with the state fire marshal, state approvals with the state building official, and we'd have to go back through our own regulatory bodies here, wetlands and planning and zoning. We've saved 4 months by moving forward with the original design. And the original design is 855,000 square feet on the cube with 1.2 million square feet on the yield, which is roughly the same size as what Pratt & Whitney was in its heyday. There will be anywhere from 1,800 jobs to 3,000 jobs created on this site, with significant tax revenue coming in 2 grand lists from now. So that's where we are.
Thank you.
That is good news. I know that at times you may have to mention how you think that the budget situation and how it may affect taxes in the next fiscal year. Right now, with this expense budget in its unadjusted state. And of course, I believe you've got a State of the Town address maybe tomorrow. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. You may have mentioned in the past that you think that without any reductions at all, that the mill rate might go up by 0.82. And 1 mill is approximately $2.5 million? Is that?
$2,840,000.
2,840,
Roughly,
okay, yeah.
roughly.
And with right now the Board of Ed asking for 1.7 more,
2 million more.
2 million more, and right now with the fire department with their request for additional personnel, I don't see how in the unadjusted state that only 0.82 mils would be the impact on taxes.
Well, what Michael is referring to is that last night he was kind enough to invite me to speak before the North Haven Rotary Club, and it was a packed house over at J-Ruse. And I gave an update that in the present state, if everything continues the way it is, that we'd probably be 0.82 mils on an increase. But that is where we are now. What I didn't say last night was that does not include any vetting we do to take out requests. Actually, if we look at the Board of Ed increase, this is kind of what I said last night, Mike. The $2 million more that the Board of Education is going to come in with here on Saturday, March 3rd, and they've already told us this is what it is. We announced it last night. That right there is about 0.8 tenths of a mil, maybe a little bit more, but in that area. So that's the struggle we have. And what we're going to see here on March 3rd is Dr. Cronin and the Board of Ed are going to come in and say we need the 4% just to keep everything the same. the town is not gonna be able to afford all the requests from all the departments. Telling everybody that right now. The only way to afford it is massive tax increases, and we're not gonna have a massive tax increase here. The number one issue all across the state of Connecticut that's now been exacerbated by the 7 cents a gallon gas on tax and a $3 a tire surcharge. That I'm not even sure if you're aware of that. In order to fund the state transportation fund, every time anybody in North Haven buys a set of 4 tires, you have to pay $12 extra that goes to the state transportation fund. So that's the number one issue right now. And what's happening is every mayor and first selectman across the state, and I can tell you this because I'm part of all those meetings, they're all concerned that as the state revenue declines, it ends up being a forced property tax increase at the municipal level. And none of us want to deal with having to have significant tax increases when residents are already strapped. That's where we're at right now.
So unvetted, unadjusted then, if education itself is 0.8 of a mil
Right.
of an increase, then what about, when you added everything together, wouldn't
But you're-
the impact on taxes be much greater than 0.82?
You're putting the cart before the horse. We're
No,
not-
I
but
well, I
we're
just
not-
want to
we're
know
not
the
anywhere near
context
there.
and what he might say again tomorrow on the State of the Town address.
Well, tomorrow's an update, because I'm addressing the business community. And that's an update on the economic development. And I've got a lot to talk about on that as projects are starting to unfold here. But to come back to your question, Michael, I would say if we were to accept all of the requests from the departments right now, it's about a 2.5 million, of 2.2 to 2.5 mil increase.
Now, okay, that's good. So as long as the public understands the daunting task that we have in terms of the cuts we have to make, or the reductions or the postponements in order to whittle this down. But I just didn't understand what the .82 referred to last.
It was kind of earmarked towards the Board of Ed specifically with the
Yeah.
2 million.
All right, so when you are making projections at all, what assumptions are you making regarding state funding? Are you,
Right now, with these numbers right here.
with the numbers that were given to us by
Yeah,
CCM?
that's right.
Okay, including that town bonded aid. Okay, all right. Well, thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay.
You good, Michael?
Almost. We had a health insurance meeting, health insurance advisory group meet in the previous month, and there is some halfway decent news there. Did you want to express what happened in that meeting?
Ed, I'll turn that one over to you. I was at the meeting, but you can feel free.
Yeah, I think that our numbers, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to come in based on what he came up with, around 4 or 5%, I think he said at the time.
Which is about 6 or 7% less than our original projection, I think.
Yeah, we have 8 in the, actually, we have 8 in the budget right now, so.
So we have, you're right, it's 8 in the budget. So if it comes in at 4, we can take 4% out of that health insurance line out of this upcoming budget. And just as a refresher for everybody, we went self-insured last year. That saved us $1,226,000. That if we didn't go self-insured, which kept the same plan design, for the employees, that we would have had an increase, a significant increase last year, which would have dovetailed into this year. So there is good news on that. The self-insured model right now is working for us. We're funding the levels. Ed's doing a great job on that. And we're trying to identify,
We'll be meeting again.
we'll be meeting again, yes.
And that covers the Board of Ed as well?
Yes.
Because they
Yes, it
keep
does.
showing that they have a deficit currently.
They're talking about next year.
Right,
They're
right.
not talking about this year.
Right,
So that's a kind of a
Their
financial.
claims are running higher.
Yes,
Right.
their claims are running higher on the Board of Ed side, so.
that's what I was asking.
Yeah, right,
All right.
For the budget, it's covered.
right.
For Mr. Swinkowski, I just wanted to make the annual requests for the grand list analysis that comes from the assessor, yeah, what's filed with the state. I know I did get a copy of one now, but I'm not sure if it's in its finished state or not. And the grand list did go up by a surprising amount again.
Well, the grand list went up. And at a time when municipalities' grand lists are declining, Wallingford's a good example of that. The grand list went up about 0.8%, I think, as the calculation. So that's a flow of incremental revenue coming from the town. It's good news. It's going to be 2 grand lists from now that the grand list will spike considerably because of Amazon and some of the other projects that'll come into.
But 0.8 of 1.8 billion is a very nice number.
Yeah, I think Gary had to revise that.
There were some offsets to it?
Yeah.
There was some offsets,
So
so.
it's
They're still showing growth, but
Yes, you're right. Thank you.
what happens in municipal government, there's tax appeals, and we have to settle those.
2.8 billion. Thank you. Thank you, sir. That's important to get that first number straight.
Michael, it's less than what I had hoped for, but nonetheless, it's some growth.
Well, it's okay. You do very well in your day job. You like that. Yeah. And Mr. Swinkowski, also, if you can update us on the labor contracts. I just, if you can revise the summary sheet so that we can understand how all the labor groups relate to the budget and to future years.
For next meeting.
Yes, please.
One final note there, Mr. Chairman, and for Michael, also on the Board of Finance. We have, I think, $300,000, Ed, that's budgeted for Quinnipiac University.
Correct.
It's budget, so I've spoken with the new president, I've met with Quinnipiac University. There'll be another significant pilot payment to us. It'll be a payment, a lump sum payment that will satisfy the pilot. That'll probably be $340,000, $335 to $340, which would be more than what we've budgeted for. And then they're offering me a significant amount of money to help with some projects, playscapes for handicapped children, which I've been working with the PTAs on, and perhaps some other community-based projects. So that'll be part of that. And Ridge Road School is an example. I'm working with that PTA to help them raise the funds for a handicap-accessible playscape, which is very, very important, and Quinnipiac will help us underwrite that, in addition to the pilot of $335,000 to $40,000.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the questions and concerns that are pertinent to this board.
Any other board members have questions or comments? We move to public comment. Ms. Wemme?
Okay. Thanks, I didn't see that.
I just got it.
Okay, thanks, okay.
Behind schedule.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Sally Buemi, 5 Blossom Drive. A couple of my matters were already touched upon by Mr. Hallahan, and I'll try to go as quickly as I can. I know you have some workshops.
4 of them.
Okay, I'll go as quick. I have a lot of stuff here, though. Just one question for the first selectman. You mentioned Amazon building fees, 1 to 1.3 million. At the June 8th Board of Selectmen meeting, that was a big meeting, the media was there, that was the big announcement. The Board of Selectmen approved the tax incentive agreement unanimously. And then we also had presented the building fee agreement, which I abstained from because when we got the explanations on that, the dollar amounts for construction costs were much lower than was anticipated and what was discussed at the November 15th, 2016 town meeting, which approved the building fee waiver. It came in about 101 million, which was much lower than we anticipated. And so the figures that were presented, and perhaps Mr. Donahue might recall this from the Board of Selectmen meeting, was, and this is my best recollection, the building fees would be about 640,000, far less than the million that we were told. So what, and since the building is still the 855,000 square feet, and I understand the different level there, but that's what it was back in June, there was talk about having to redo the tax incentive and building fee agreement if they changed the floor print, but the town attorney told me within the past few weeks that wasn't necessary because it's really still all the same. So what leads you to believe that it's not the 640,000 that we were told in June, but it's in fact 1 to 1.3 million?
Oh, the number I was quoting included fire fees.
Oh, it did, the
Yes.
fire, okay, that wasn't clear. I thought that you
Yes.
were talking exclusively about building fees.
Building and fire.
Okay, because Mr. Hallahan's question was on the revenue line item for building fees. And so when you answered, I thought it was exclusively on building fees.
So just, everyone knows, so Sally, just if I can comment on this, everyone that's
Sure.
in this budget, you see that they're right underneath each other. Building fees and fire fees is part of the aggregate line items that I was mentioning earlier. And that's the number I was quoting for the two.
For both of them, all right, okay. Fair enough. I was hoping for even more for fire fees than
It
that.
might be, it might
Okay.
be.
All right, I hope so. And on the health insurance, that was one of the questions I had, which you've sort of covered with the 4 to 5%. The number one reason in support of going self-insured and combining, I believe we're combined with Ansonia and ACES, is my memory serving me correctly?
ACES, Ansonia, and Ed,
The board.
Yeah.
and the board.
Our Board of Ed.
Right.
and
Oh, yeah,
Someone's
well,
Board of Ed
Right.
and-
Right. So, I thought that if I'm recalling the presentation correctly, we were told that it would save on administrative costs.
Yeah.
I mean, the claims are going to be what the claims are going to be.
Right.
People are going to need surgeries or not, or whatever. Are we seeing a savings that we were hoping in the administrative costs, putting
Yeah.
aside the claims?
Well, and that's kind of part of the 1,228,000 I mentioned we saved last year, because the savings are in the administrative costs and also elimination of state taxes, because with a fully insured model, any fully insured municipality has to pay approximately 200,000 in state taxes. We've eliminated that.
Okay.
And the way this works is, if I can use an old business term that I used to use, vertical silos. North Haven's in a vertical silo in this consortium on their own claims. Unlike the state insurance policy where there's a risk pool where if you go into the state, you're susceptible to other municipalities with high claims. We're not susceptible to that. We're in a silo. But over the overarching aspect of this is because we're in there with ACES, which is a huge census database, and Sonia, boards of ed, we're able to utilize aggregate purchasing power because there's a lot of people in our consortium. That, when you go to an Anthem then is more willing to negotiate their own administrative costs. Because there's a
Okay.
larger census data, Sally.
I see.
So that's how we save the money.
Right, well, you said we saved 1.2. We didn't really save it, we budgeted 1.2 less in anticipation of savings. Isn't that
Yeah.
more accurate? Because this
Yeah.
is our first year.
Because as I mentioned earlier,
That's-
if we didn't do it, we would have
Right, no, I
spent the
understand that. So we budgeted 1.2 million less in anticipation of saving administrative costs. My question was really, putting the claims aside, which I understand we don't have so much control over. I was just interested in the administrative
Okay.
costs. So thank you for your silo farming, or it's more of a
vertical silos.
whatever I see a farm when you talk about silos. Okay, I wanted to comment a little bit about the fire department, and I'm sorry, Mr. And I might be saying his name wrong. Board of Finance member Mr. Lionos is not here.
Leonis.
Excuse me,
Leonis.
Leonis. Excuse me. Thank
No,
you,
it's fine.
Mr. Chairman. Having a difficult last name to pronounce, you think I'd be more careful. I thought he made a really good comment at the fire department workshop when we were talking. There was a discussion about overtime, and the chief was explaining about the overtime and how there are 7 personnel in the fire department that are at the top as far as benefits, I'll say, of getting 30 vacation days plus the 5 personal days and the 5 sick days, 2 personal days, whatever, 37 total days. And you can't fault people for taking days off that they're contractually allowed to take. So you have 7 of those times 37 times 24 hours, because you have to remember that the fire department works 24 hours at a time. So if they take a day off, you got to fill 24 hours at time and a half. So I thought that the chief did a good job in explaining the overtime, which I've been concerned about and we've all been concerned about. But Mr. Leonos had a very good point about it's really a contract labor issue. And I thought that was an interesting point. I mean, I'm certainly in favor of reasonable salaries and benefits for our members of our labor unions, but I do think he had a very good point about negotiating future labor contracts. And it brought to mind, I've been on the Board of Selectmen 4+ years, and I've participated in several contract negotiations, as you both, Mr. Doheny and yourself, know. And very often, those are held in executive session, but I think it's safe for me to say that the labor attorney very often explains to us comparisons with how things go in other towns and municipalities, and he'll measure certain things against what is done in other towns. And so along those lines, so a lot of the provisions in these labor contracts seem to always be in line with what's happening everywhere. So I would like to use one of your favorite things, Michael, which is a baseball analogy. You talk a lot about the South Central Regional Council of Government, the COG. And that consists of about 15 towns in the New Haven area. And I've been to a couple of the meetings. They're very interesting. It's a large table, and it's, mayor, first selectman. It's all these mayors and first selectmen sitting around. It's pretty interesting. And so I kind of equate that to like an owners meeting in Major League Baseball. I know, hear me out. You've made some crazy analogies yourself. So, it might be prudent to, at one of these meetings, to talk to the other owners, if you will, and say, we've got to do something about these runaway, contracts, because that's really what this is about as far as the overtime goes. And I just thought you would enjoy that reference. As far as the chief's specific request for 8 firefighters for this year and 8 for next year, I found that to be excessive, and I took it upon myself to do a great deal of research, and I consulted with many other fire chiefs and other fire professionals, as well as our own fire chief and our chairman of our fire commission. And, a lot of towns our size don't even have paid fire departments. They have all volunteer, and a lot of them don't provide emergency medical service. But we do, and, I think it's a great service. And our number of calls really hasn't changed over the past 20 years. It's been between 4,000 and 4,500. But the makeup of those calls has changed dramatically. And there are far more emergency medical calls for a variety of reasons. Our median age is 5 years older than the state average, and we have a lot more 55 and older facilities, whatever. There's a lot of medical calls. So I'm very supportive of, keep in mind, we have 4 shifts. They work 24 hours, then 3 days off. I'm in favor of hiring 4 new firefighters, which would increase the shift from an current 8-man shift. And when I say 8-man, I mean that to be gender neutral. An 8-man shift to a 9-man shift would enable both of our medical rescue vehicles to go out at the same time. Right now, only one can go out. The other one is used strictly for as a backup in case Medical Rescue 1 is in the repair shop. I think it would behoove us to have both vehicles used, and for that reason, if we had a 9-man shift, 2 could be out contemporaneously on Medical Unit 1 and Medical Unit 2, still leaving 5 at headquarters. You need a minimum of 3, if I remember what the chief told me, Mr. Chairman. The chief explained to me that you need 3 men with an engine and 2 men with a ladder truck. So if you go to 9, you could allow for both medical units to go out contemporaneously and still have the 5 back at headquarters that are necessary for the fire apparatus in the event of a fire. I think it's an appropriate compromise. It does take into account the rising percentage increase of medical calls, and the only issue is when would this be appropriate? And unless we make major cuts this year, I would put it off until 2 years when more money is available from Amazon. I would like to say one thing that I learned in talking with the chief, and that is about 15% of our calls, which is about 700 calls a year, go to other medical facilities in town. And when I first heard that, I was baffled. I'm like, why are our emergency medical responders going to places where there's lots of doctors? And probably one of the main places that they go is to the medical epicenter, the Yale New Haven Hospital facility on Devine Street. And I'm saying, well, why do they go there? There's doctors there. but it's not, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chairman, this is how I understood it. It's not an emergency room facility. It's primarily a facility for treatments, chemo, radiation treatments. And very often, I mean, every day, I believe, our fire department is there for calls at the Yale facility on Devine Street for, cardiac events or whatever. So along with you mentioned earlier about getting the voluntary payment from Quinnipiac, to help supplement the state's pilot program. Pilot payment in lieu of taxes, for those listening. The state does give towns some help, very little, but some help to compensate for lost tax revenue for tax-exempt properties. And the three main properties we have are Quinnipiac University, the Yale New Haven Hospital on Devine, and then the state property, Orchard Hill, Gateway, whatever. Are the three, isn't that right, Mr. Smokowski? Those three are the main. So anyway, we do get some voluntary payment from Quinnipiac. Given the fact that Yale is really, we are probably expending more of our fire department resources on the taxpayers' dime at the medical epicenter. I think it's time to knock on the door at Yale and see if they would be willing to make a voluntary payment. Because
I've already started those discussions.
Oh,
Now, I don't know where it's going to end up, though.
it's a good idea then if we both had it, Michael.
You know, it's tricky because the state of Connecticut wants to tax hospitals, and hospitals are pushing back. And at the state level now, there's something called SILOT, S-I-L-O-T, which is an acronym for Services in Lieu of Taxes. And many municipalities want to tax the hospitals and the universities as part of SILOT. So there's a lot of acrimony over this issue right now. But I have a good relationship with the hospital. We've started the discussion, so we'll see where it ends up.
Well, they should know how often they're calling us. And, like I said, I think we go there far more than we go to Quinnipiac. But anyway, it's just an idea, and that obviously you've thought about it. Okay. Specific ideas on cuts for the budget. I was thinking about the contingency line item. We always budget $300,000. In the 5 budgets that I've been following, I've hardly ever seen that used. What would you think for these 2 gap years of reducing that to $150,000?
Well, it's tricky because a few years ago we had an emergency situation with the fire department.
Right.
And it was during the winter time. And if we didn't have the contingency, we would have had to go into a town meeting in a blizzard to try to appropriate
Yeah.
the funds for the emergency
We would have
vehicle.
the funds to-
Keep in mind now, to this point, that Sally's bringing it up, this administration took the contingency down from $1 million a year, which would years ago, it was $1 million. It was $1 million or $1.2 million. We took it down to 300, so that's sort of a marginal safety net for us. And
Yeah.
it's tricky, Sally. It's a tough one.
Yeah, well, with the exception of, I believe we discussed that expenditure. I think someone's trying to get in. Either that. Someone get the door, please. I remember discussing that at a Board of Selectmen meeting. I believe one of our rescue vehicles broke down on a way to a call. But other than that use, I can't think of any other time that we've used
That's true.
any of the 300,000. I refer to Cheshire, which I've looked at other town budgets and their contingency line items. Cheshire is pretty comparable to North Haven. Their budget's a little bigger at 113. Ours is 96 million. They have a contingency of 125. I just thought in the short term, something to think about. I also think in the capital line, we could, and my friends at the North Haven Historical Society aren't going to like me for this. I know, we have friends there, both of us. But I think that the 120 allocated again for this year for Martha Culver can be spread out, maybe 40, I don't know. I don't see that as it's, again, nobody loves history and the importance of history more than I do, you know that, Michael, but that's something that I would take a close look at. And I have a bunch of other stuff, but, you've got a lot of stuff. There's
There's
other
other people
people.
that would
I
like to
appreciate
speak.
your, oh, no, I do have to say this. Wait a minute. I do have the Connecticut Conference of Municipality document that Mr. Hallahan brought up and that you were referencing, if any of you want to
We have a copy.
look at it. Okay, because Mr. Frieda mentioned the 61, he said $67,000 reduction. It's actually 61,536. Keep in mind, and this is where it gets tricky, folks. That figure is, if you look at this document, you said you all have it in front of you, they are saying for the current fiscal year, the one we're in now, CCM has concluded that we're getting 5.9 in total state aid. Now, keep in mind, you all have the revenue reports in front of you. We only budgeted this year for 5.2. And they're saying we're going to get 5.9. I had calculated it at 5.7, so they actually have it at more. And then, of course, the $5.8 million figure that Mike referenced for what the governor's proposing that we get for the upcoming fiscal year. If you subtract those, there you get the 61,000.
Right.
But that is not a reduction in state aid to North Haven. In fact, if we got the 5.8, it would be a $500,000 or $600,000 increase in what we've budgeted for. You really have to compare budget revenue to budget revenue. You can't just look at a document like this and say, oh, it's a $61,000 reduction, because what they're reducing it from, the 5.9, is so much higher than what we budgeted for. So I think that's really important to understand. There was an article in today's paper, in the Post, that said that we were getting an 11%, $500,000 plus reduction in ECS. As you can see from here, it's actually a $154,000 increase. So I don't know where these numbers are coming from or how people are using them or abusing them. I think we're fine with state aid. We budgeted 5.2. We're going to get more than that, and I think we're going to get even more for this upcoming fiscal year. And I would definitely include the 1.4 MRSA in the revenue budget for this coming year as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally.
But I just have one clarification to ask there. On the state report, it includes a couple revenue line items that are not actually part of our revenue budget. Is that correct? The LoSiP or the town aid road or not?
Right.
Yeah.
They're separate funds.
They're all
Most
separate
is not
funds.
even money, it's an allotment, and you don't,
Yeah, so I don't know if you were matching it up versus revenue line items that are in our revenue report or not, but a couple of these items are not in our revenue report.
I was matching it with the 5.2 that we budgeted for and the
But the
chart.
the
that's not in there, that's
5.2 that we
specific.
budgeted for did not include a couple of those line items, right?
Right, but I was comparing that 5.2 that we budgeted for with the document that Mr. Swikowski generated at the last Board of Finance meeting, not with this one. And that showed us getting about 5.6 million. So
Thank you.
that's what I was comparing it to.
Very good.
Yes. Mary White.
Mary White, Summer Lane. I have some questions and comments. Okay, so the question I have is, what is the amount that will be set aside for the senior tax freeze program? The past 2 years, I believe the amount set aside was $50,000. Will it be more, the same, or less for this budget year?
I think we budgeted the same amount, didn't we?
Same? Okay. Last time I spoke with you, I discussed a compromise idea relative to the turf field maintenance and turf fields replacement savings plan. I suggested a 50-50 compromise between the town and the Board of Ed. The topic of the fields came up at the recent Board of Education meeting, which I attended. The Board of Ed will be taking care of the maintenance of the turf fields, which includes the Sprint Turf annual maintenance contract and a new maintenance employee. However, there are no provisions for replacement savings. On the subject of turf field rentals, it was stated that the turf fields will not be available for rent Monday through Friday due to the fact that the high school and middle school teams will be utilizing the turf fields. The fields will be available for rent to town teams and other private teams on the weekends. Other possible revenue sources the Board of Ed is considering are jamboree events where teams would pay to participate, perhaps $500 or more each, and Battle of the Bands events, which would take place on the turf fields where the bands would pay a fee to participate. Getting back to the compromise, the town side of the budget will have to save for the replacement of the 2 turf fields. The warranty on the turf fields expires in 8 years. There is hope, but no guarantee, the 2 turf fields will last 9 or 10 years. However, to be fiscally responsible, we must be prepared financially to replace them in 8 years when the warranty expires. Until it is known exactly how much money can be generated from weekend rentals and events, the town must set aside $100,000 every year. This will ensure $800,000 will be in place in 8 years when the turf field's warranty expires. Question: will the Board of Finance set aside on the town side of the budget $100,000 every year for the turf field's replacement, which guarantees the money will be in place in 8 years when the warranty expires, and will ensure taxpayers will not have to suffer a mill rate increase just to replace the 2 fields?
I assume the Board of Ed, if there is a replacement cost, will have it in their budget.
They do
as it
not.
stands right now. We haven't seen their budget.
I was there.
It'll be,
I heard.
it'll be an item that this board can discuss or look at during the budget process.
Okay.
We're not in any position to make
All right,
any
I'm-
statement at this time.
I'm giving you a heads up.
Okay.
It's not in there.
Mr. Chairman, I think if you looked around town, there's all kinds of long-term costs that we don't set aside sinking funds for. The
Exactly.
only one I can think of, by the way, is the
Assessment.
assessment, right. And so I'm not saying it's not a good idea. It'd be great if we could do it. But I think it's actually a broader topic that, we're going to start setting aside reserves for a long-term replacement of items in the future. And it'd be great to do that, but we haven't done that. I mean, frankly, what we've done, we don't do it for roads. There's the most obvious thing in my mind. What we've done is we've bonded for it, not just when Mike's been in office, but in the past, and we've used the LoSiP and other funds, Town Aid Road. So, I mean, I guess it's a subject for a conversation here at the board, but it's just not something that we as a board have done. Not that I'm saying, again, it's not a bad idea, but
So you're suggesting that if the board decides not to do it, because you normally aren't doing that, you're suggesting that in 8 years, let's suppose they both have to be replaced, you're suggesting bonding the $800,000 replacement fee?
I'm not making a suggestion of what might happen 8 years from now. I'm saying that we haven't done it for other items in town, like roofs and other things. I guess, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, my understanding is the Board of Ed maintains the fields that they are in control of around the school, right?
Right
The
now.
town does help as well, from what I understand.
Okay. So, I mean, I think that's another conversation as to why all of a sudden on this one, they don't want to maintain the field.
They are maintaining the fields, they just cannot, they have such a small percentage where they can work within their budget, and they just cannot afford to save for the replacement of the fields.
Well, I mean,
They're not allowed to carry over. Well, they could save
well,
on
right.
capital.
I mean,
They
look,
do
we
save on capital.
we get a capital budget every year, right? I mean, ideally, I guess, we could be setting aside reserves for fire trucks and yellow iron, for the public works, or the 3 police vehicles that we normally put in the budget. I guess just a way of doing things, Mary, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but I think the board would have to talk about it, but I think the board should talk about it in the context of not just these turf fields, but in the way that we've managed the long-term capital requirements of the town.
Okay. And then the only thing I wanted to say about that is that with other things such as roofs or vehicles or whatever, there's no life cycle that's
Sure there
like
is.
a guaranteed life cycle as far as 8 years, the warranty expires, boom, we have to be ready to
Well,
replace them.
I would disagree. Listen, the warranty expires in 8 years.
Yep.
I don't know enough about turf fields to tell you if the field is going to last 5 years or 10 years. But someone can reasonably tell you it's 8 years. Some can reasonably tell you if they put a new roof on the police station, it's going to last X number of years. And you know that if it's 20 or 25, whatever the right number is, you'll be within striking distance of that when the time comes. So someone can reasonably tell you, an expert in roofs or fields, what the number is, right? I'm not saying they can hit it on the dime, but they could tell you. They can tell you how long a Victor could tell you how long one of his Packers last, or he was here for the recycle vehicles, last month. I'm sure he could tell you again within reason what a truck lasts for, or lasts, excuse me.
Understand your position, thank you.
All right, moving on.
Excuse me, Mary, could I comment,
Sure.
please? Several months ago, we had various people here talking about the field maintenance, the installation of new fields, and I specifically asked Mr. Frieda if what he said about maintaining the fields and replacing them is something the town would take on. I believe he said yes.
I did, but it's not our decision right now. It's the Board of Ed's decision. It's a proposal to the Board of Ed. They're considering it. As Mary mentioned, they're trying to determine what the fees would be for the jamborees on the weekends. So until they come to us and say that they don't want to handle it, they haven't done that yet. And we won't know until we talk to them on March 3rd.
It'd be a good thing to bring up with them at their
Yes.
workshop.
I agree.
We may get fees out of this field, and I don't know, but historically, from what I've known about the town of North Haven, is that we've been short on fields all over town for all the various youth athletic programs, and I would be shocked if there was significant revenue coming from jamborees and things. I mean, not saying it won't happen again, but based on the demand that I know that exists in this town for quality fields, I'm expecting those fields are going to get heavy use 7 days a week.
Okay.
Okay.
Often during budget seasons, we hear needs versus wants. I would like to suggest an expanded approach to evaluating the requests from department heads, and that is critical needs versus wants. Here are some definitions of the word critical. Having the potential to become disastrous, grave, serious, dangerous, perilous, risky, dire, uncertain, at a point of crisis, life and death. It is the last one, life and death, that must be applied by the Board of Finance when evaluating the requests. Ask this question: does the request mean life and death if it is not included in the budget? Will lives be lost? If yes, then it is a critical need and must be budgeted for first. The 8 firemen requested by the fire chief represent a critical need. People have died and will continue to die because there are not enough fire personnel paramedics on per shift and not enough fire apparatus to handle the call volume. Calls are going unanswered. This is unacceptable. 63% of calls for service are for emergency medical service and advanced life support. Simultaneous calls for service are happening, and second and third calls are out of luck. They will eventually be answered by AMR, who will eventually arrive with 2 EMTs. Only paramedics can perform advanced life support, such as running an IV to administer clot-busting drugs when someone is having a heart attack, or intubate to open an airway, or contact the cath lab at the hospital after determining a patient has had a heart attack. Sally Blamey was suggesting 4 firemen. So while I'm not an expert, I have been listening to meetings, and I've learned that the 4 firemen on the engine 1, one of them is a supervisor. So let's say there's a call for fire. What would happen is, according to what Sally's presenting with the 4, you'd have 3 on engine 1. So the 3 apparatus, hopefully if they're available, would go for the fire call. When they get upon the scene, the supervisor will not be able to act in the supervisory way. He has to become part of the fire suppression team. So let's say my house is on fire. We call 911. Here comes North Haven. But we only have 3 on truck 1. So what would happen is, who's going to call the gas company to shut the gas off to my house? Who's going to call the UI company? Who's going to call in, make the decision to call in volunteers? Who's going to call in the paid firemen? Who's going to call in for mutual aid? Who's going to make this decision? Because that supervisor is part of the team. So I think that it's not safe what she's proposing. Okay. Not having enough paramedics on per shift represents a public health and safety hazard. We must support the fire chief's request for 8 firemen. This will bring the number of firefighters on per shift to 10, which include 2 paramedics. This is a start to ending the public health and safety hazard. We learned that 2,840,000 equals 1 mil. 8 firemen is about $1 million. So if my math is correct, and I'm not great in math, but that would equal less than $500,000 to save lives. So to conclude, please remember during the budget season to evaluate all requests this way: critical needs versus wants, and budget and fund for the critical need of 8 firemen paramedics first. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan Tissman, Bob, just a couple quick questions first. The town aid for the roads. I read that we're getting like 179. Is that part of that 587,000? Or is that separate?
Which 587, Brian, which?
That's why I was confused. You were saying, or,
No, the 5,800,000.
oh, the 5 million?
Yes, right.
And then the open space grant, that's a separate fund that we're also getting, the 200,000 to buy
Yeah, we're
like
actually.
29 acres or?
We're reimbursing ourselves from a purchase from last April to the tune of about 40% of that purchase price for that open space.
Now to kind of piggyback on what Mary and what Sally has spoken about the fire department, I won't take too long because they've kind of stolen my talking points, but I have to agree with Mary, and Sally, don't take this the wrong way. The fire department, you guys sat through 3 hours of a budget workshop where our fire chief really kind of schooled us all and broke down everything down to a point where everybody should understand. I think you guys were impressed with it. I think you learned a lot. I know I did. Before I lived here, I was a volunteer fireman in North Branford. And there's nothing worse going to a call when you're one of 4 people, when you've got a working fire, where you've got a motor vehicle accident, and there's only 4 of you, and you've got to bring out 3 units, an emergency, a pumper, a squad, anything. North Haven has the luxury of having both now, where the volunteer has gone down as far as the participants. I know at the meeting they said that there was a day of, I think it was January 10th, where you had 3 or 4 calls within a half hour all over town. It's happened 3 more times since the budget workshop. Most recent was on the 2nd of February. Had a motor vehicle, you had a kitchen fire in Montawees. You had a fall victim, that was like at 10:30. You had a fall victim on Clintonville Road at 10:35. At 10:45, they had to go to Divine Street. At Divine Street, they couldn't send anybody. The fire department had nobody to send because you had a possible working fire at one end of town, you had a fall victim in the other. That takes 3 units right there. Having only 4 firemen is not going to solve the problem. You need the 8. I'm glad Sally's watching the numbers. She's great at that, and I agree with the numbers. But theoretically, 4 is not going to solve the problem, as Mary has alluded to, and I believe the fire chief really supported it. It's a major increase of 8 this year and 8 next year because we're building or thinking 3 to 5 years down the road. I don't even want to even think or talk about Amazon's money coming in because it's not here. We're putting that money, we're dreaming about that, and it's not here yet. It's going to come, but that's great. But with that, there's other things that not only Amazon buildings, but we've got other major projects of housing that's going to put a strain on the services, both the police department, the fire department, and even sanitation, our public works. 8 firemen is almost a minimum. And if this board does not give that that fire department what it needs, we're going to experience a 9/11 moment here. And I don't like to use that term too much, but it's going to happen. It's already happened once in August. Not that if we didn't have the other calls when we had that house fire and that heart attack victim and 2 other calls at the same time. But this is serious. This is not building playscapes. This is not having an extra concert or a bigger band coming at the concerts in the green. This is, and I know you guys work hard at this. You guys really do. You crunch the numbers. But this is what government's supposed to do, is protect and serve the people. And if we don't give our departments what they need, we're all going to suffer. Our residents are going to suffer. It could be a kid falling off a bike. It could be somebody becoming ill. It could be a house fire. It could be another motor vehicle accident. We have 24,000 people in this town, and at one point, it could be higher at one point. And to have only 3 engines going out to serve at any shift is not enough. And I've said this before publicly and privately. All you got to do is have a scanner or listen to a scanner for a week, and it will scare the hell out of you what goes on. What our police department goes through, our fire department. There's too many times where they're not sending a unit out. We're relying on AMR or an ambulance, and that's critical. 3 to 5 minutes more, it's not good. Like I said, I've been there. I've been into a scene where I've had to work at a scene, and there's only 3 of us, and we've rang the tones for Company 2 and Company 3, and there's nobody in town. And when you're only relying on the paid because the volunteers are not there that much during the day, maybe at night a little bit more. Call volume is consistent, but it's the type of calls and when they're coming in. I'm becoming part of the CERT team, which is another extension of town government, try to help and volunteer help the towns. But even the CERT members could only do so much. So I know this board works hard. You asked a lot of questions at that 3-hour meeting, and I hope people watch that video because it explains a lot, and hopefully they'll watch the police and the public works. But I have to disagree with Sally on this. 4 is not enough. Again, she's great with the numbers, but she doesn't have the expertise as running a fire service department. And you have to, the theory 4 works, but 8 is the reality. And I hope this board takes that into consideration. I know we're all crunching for numbers. The state's not helping us at all. We're relying on ourselves. But as a taxpayer, and not anything else other than a taxpayer, a $2 million increase to serve and protect the people of the town is important. And I know you take that very seriously. I've worked with you guys long enough over the years, but at this point in juncture, we have to rebuild our fire department and build it, because even like you were saying about why would somebody want to work here at North Haven, it's a great town to work as far as the fire department, but there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to find 1, 2, 3 paramedics, because other towns are going to be grabbing them, and firemen too. It takes time to train them, just as our police department. So I hope you take that into consideration.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pat?
Pat Nazzolillo, 7 Mansfield Road, Chairman of the North Haven Fire Commission. I want to thank Mary White and Sally Buemi and Brian Testa. I mean, I certainly, as Chairman of the Commission, appreciate their willingness to step up to the microphone and have their voices heard and support what the fire department has proposed. Our senior management of our fire department has 60-plus years of experience, 3 master's degrees, and our chief is going to be working on his doctorate's degree in the very near future. They are experts in the fire community and the fire safety. The chief has proposed to add 8 additional firefighters, which will add a paramedic unit to each shift, which will be 2 paramedics per shift. Sally has proposed to remove 1 firefighter from the only vehicle that we have that provides water to a fire scene. Also, that vehicle includes, as Brian indicated, the lieutenant who is the commander of the scene and is first on the scene with the vehicle that has the water, and they begin to fight that fire. In 2010, we obtained a federal grant to add paramedics to our program. We made a commitment as a town and as a fire department to add a fourth person to that water engine, into that engine, if you will, in order for us to make sure that we are in compliance with the federal guidelines. So removing one of those persons is not an option for us, because we've already made our commitment on behalf of the town and on behalf of the fire department to have 4 of those persons on that apparatus. And I repeat again, it's the only apparatus that carries water. So it's first on the scene in the event of a fire. So we absolutely need the 8 firefighters in order to man, if you will, another rescue vehicle, to have 2 paramedics on shift in order to provide life-saving support for our residents of our town. I've heard a couple of things that were said, and I think Brian just mentioned it would be a $2 million increase, and I think we need to clarify that. We already looked at $1 million being approximately $500,000. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're looking at approximately $500,000 increase in order to add these 8 firefighters, which what Mary clearly indicated. What price do we want to pay as residents of this town in order to perform life-saving opportunities for our family members, our children, our parents, or ourselves? And as our population ages, we certainly need to take that into consideration. I know that there's a daunting task that this commission has, and I opened my comments during the workshop, and said just that. I absolutely know that it's a difficult situation, but it is a situation that I believe that needs serious consideration, and our hope as commissioners is that your commission will look to allocate the monies to go ahead and hire those 8 firefighters. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
Hey,
Sherman,
Pat,
you had something?
Pat, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
I don't really want to discuss budget items and have anyone draw a conclusion until all departments have presented their budgets to us.
I know.
Okay.
Just a quick question. So there's 7 firefighters on shift now, right?
There's 8.
8.
8. So if you have 8 plus, using Sally's idea for just a minute, that'd be 9, right? So if there's a medical call, you have an EMT and a paramedic go out, right? If the second medical call came in, you'd have an EMT and a paramedic go out. Why does that leave 3 and not 5?
Because we have a total of 8 firefighters on shift. 2 are in the rescue, 4 are in the engine, and 2 are on the ladder truck. So we're missing calls now, Tim. We miss a number of calls on a daily basis.
Right.
So we absolutely, and as I indicated, with the SAFER grant that we were successful to obtain in 2010, we committed to have 4 firefighters on the engine.
No, I forgot about the ladder. That's the answer, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Pat. Sherman? While public comment is open, if you can keep it brief, we are almost an hour behind. We have 4 workshops after this. Thank you.
Question about the senior tax relief program that you put a max of 50,000 on. I believe it's nowhere near that in actual use. Gary, what about 30,000? Which is a drop in the bucket in dollars that we're talking about in this town. And I have to point out that a few very affluent people in town objected to this relief fund for seniors who can't pay their bills. Here's something I'm confused on. You have towns get different amounts of money from the state based on their wealth or how well they do their business and so on. Is that true?
It's a complicated formula, Sherman, but yes, it is.
Okay.
It is true.
And I bring that up because, in your zeal to keep the taxpayers calm and collected. You're telling everyone in the state what a great town we are, how wealthy we are, and how we handle our dollars, and how much money we have, and in our balance fund, and our AAA rating. You know, will that hurt us more than help us?
Well, look, I make the statements here because they're facts, and in the end, it's all public record. You
I
know,
understand
so
that.
the state knows exactly what each municipality, their bond rating is, they know their finances, it's all public record.
So you don't feel this has any
No,
effect on
but I think in theory, what you're saying is correct. There's no question that the well-run towns financially that are growing grand lists, they don't get as much money as some of the cities and towns that are distressed. So there is a redistribution of those funds to help out. Hartford's a good example. There's a $40 million bailout going on there, from what we understand, that somehow is going to get redirected, which will adversely affect, a lot of municipalities. So,
And the last thing is, I don't agree with Mary on the turf fields. I think that's the responsibility of the Board of Education, since they have to maintain them and they're responsible for keeping them in good repair. That should be their total responsibility. They want it, they put it in, they should pay for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Is there any more? Yes. Sir?
Good evening. I'm Fritz Betker from 290 Spring Road. I'm pretty much behind everything the third selectman said. I think that maybe there might be a misunderstanding about the 4 firefighters. She was recommending that we add 4 people, and I think that a person who is an expert in the subject, like the fire commissioner, would end up thinking that somebody was going to be subtracted, but from a unit by the way that they operate, and I have no idea how they do that. But in point of fact, she does want to add 4. And if a person doesn't have an expertise in the fire department per se, I think they can be forgiven in thinking that they do have an expertise in what's in their checkbook over the next year. And that, in the next 10 years, is going to be the thing that predominates in the deliberations about what we spend. I think you could satisfy the requirements of both the young ladies that were speaking if you were, whether it's 4 people or 8 people that they want, if you would take advantage of Governor Malloy's recalcitrance in giving you guys more money, which is a historical thing that's happening all over the country now, with Illinois with $250 billion in debt, in California $150 billion right now, New Jersey on the way. This is not a trend that's going away. There's not going to be an upswing in this unless it's temporary and we get another Democratic governor. The reason why they're not giving you money is because they don't have money. The reason why they don't have money is the federal government doesn't have money. That is not going to change. That $21 trillion in deficits is not going to go away overnight or in 10 years or in 20 years. So I think that if you want to take advantage of the fact that you guys were not going to receive the money from Governor Malloy that you want to, you might take the opportunity to look at the budgets that we know are historically bloated, who are basically victims of the fallacy that more is better, that we need like 11 more Etruscan origami teachers rather than the 3 they already have, that we actually need to add math coaches and intervention counselors like every year. It's probably not something that they would agree, according to the other young lady that was up here, that they would agree would be a life or death decision. It's something that they want to do because they can, not because they have to. The school system, from my mind, is operating just fine. It operated fine in 10 years. I don't necessarily think that we're going to get better service or less service if we freeze them where it is. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to go through a budget like the Board of Education's budget and assume that there's a gigantic chunk that we could take out of that budget to pay for the 4 or 8 guys that these firemen need. I could visualize the need for 4 firemen. I could visualize the need for 8 firemen. I cannot visualize the need for another 6 intervention counselors or Etruscan origami teachers. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on public comment? Can I? Yes, sir.
I'm in support of the fire chief's budget proposal. I believe that it's the critical needs versus wants is something that definitely needs to be brought into the equation, because I believe that everybody's current proposals, all the different agencies in town, can be weighed on that standard of critical needs versus wants, and with the flux of funding that we're getting or not getting from the state, everybody needs to make a sacrifice when it's not something that's a priority. And the fact is, historically, the fire department hasn't grown with the grand list growth, with all kinds of growth in town, with the increase in the medical responsibilities. So we're just by hiring 8 firefighters, paramedics, we're just taking and solving part of the problem. So I believe it's a reasonable request, and it's something that should be put at a priority in this budget season.
Thank you. Anyone else? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Ready to start?
I have 2.
Michael, will you do me a favor, just knock on that door? Knock on that door? Right there. Yep. Kelly, we good?
It's 1959.
We're done? You're, all right, we're live.
What page is this on?
Hello, again for the umpteenth year. So far, we're looking at your budget and we like it because there's no change.
None. 8?
Any,
No changes.
no changes at all?
No.
Anything special you want to tell us?
Sure. We anticipate 3 election events in the, it's all right.
We do have a meeting going on. If we can keep it down in the audience, please.
The 2018-19 fiscal year, we anticipate 3 budget or election events, election events. August 14th, we are anticipating a primary probably for more than just the governor's race. That's this year. November 6th is the gubernatorial election date. This is our PSA for elections. And next year, May 21st, is the budget referendum.
That's next year, not this year.
Yeah, 2019.
19.
Yeah.
8.
2019.
19.
Next year.
That's right,
We have
because
one
we
coming
missed
up, but
it.
that's not the fiscal year. So that's our 3 events. Of course, you guys can throw us things all the time for referendums, but that's all. And we didn't have any additions or subtractions.
Any questions from board members?
Good job.
Thank you very much.
Good job.
I had one question. How much roughly does a referendum cost?
Right now,
Yeah, like a budget referendum, how much does that cost?
somewhere between 7,500 and 8,000.
I thought it was 8,000 last time we
Yeah.
talked about it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bill? Hi, Bill. It looks like yours is basically, actually a little reduction maybe in your budget items and an increase in your capital.
That's
kind of where we're heading.
Yep. The slight decrease in Munis has to do with the change in the contract for Munis to remove two modules. The fixed asset module and project accounting was removed.
You want to just hit us on your capital items then? Because that seems to be the only difference in your budget.
Yes, there are actually three items here. The first has to do with our virtual desktop environment. Right now, we're at capacity and a little bit more. We're designed for 60 virtual desktops. We've grown to an average of somewhere between 58 and 63, which sounds small, but when you're taxing a resource right at its edge,
Yes.
it needs to be enhanced to improve performance at the desktop. But it's being well received, represents about half of our desktop infrastructure, and is in a great deal of use, especially in off-hour situations as well. So it's working out very well. The second item there talks about vSphere hosts. These are the hosts that host our 44 virtual servers. We have 13 physical servers, 44 virtual servers. These are what those desktops talk to run applications, et cetera. And that also is aging along with the virtual desktop environment. So this is for improvement to replace those to also improve performance at those desktops. The last one is our email server. Our email server is Exchange 2007. There's since been Exchange 2010, 2013, now 2016. Exchange 2007 hit end of useful life April 2017, but we're continuing to run it. It still performs okay, but I don't want to get too far behind on it.
Updates and...
Right, and the preponderance of this expense that you see here are the client access licenses, the cost per person to use that.
Yeah, I think, was it 200?
It's $200 per person, yeah.
I did want to mention something, actually, to Ed, just as a side note, looking through his package, the amendment, there's some terms about renewal, automatic renewals and such. I don't think they can do that for a municipality. I mean, in the future, I would just not, I would cross those kind of things off.
Well, we don't, my understanding is if we don't fund it, then we don't have to honor that section.
Yeah, I believe by state statute they can do it,
Right.
but I mean, I would just cross it off in any agreement. Only because I noticed it, that's why I wanted to just make a comment about it.
Yeah, there are 200 client access licenses at $70 each.
Yeah, I remember
for-
seeing
For
that.
those mailboxes. Now, we obviously don't have 200 employees, but there are also mailboxes that are entities that are part of that.
Yeah, be it Public Works, be it wherever.
Exactly.
Any questions for IT?
How did the 75,000 break down last year for capital?
It is replacing our storage area network. It's where, if you think of a computer having a disk drive, think of a very large array of disks that the entire town shares. And that's what the storage area network is. As a matter of fact, that bid is out this week.
Are we good?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Admin? Are we doing admin? The assessor. Gary? Yours was another good one. We like ones like that.
Well, it's easy when we have a small budget to keep that under control.
Yeah.
Basically, there aren't any, I'm not asking for any changes on any of the line items. We do have a reval coming up, and the quotes are expected on February 28th. It's a full inspection reval, so it's the big one. So we'll see what that looks like when that comes in.
And what year will it be in the?
2019 grand list would be the reval year.
Okay.
And also, the personnel request I made last year, I'm repeating that this year. We've reduced, the way that the department was set up was there used to be a $30,000 line item. And that was for inspection of properties, for building permits and other things. We used to hire consultants because there wasn't an assistant to do that. The person that I have on staff now is doing that. I have reduced the line to 15,000 for the last couple of years. He's not certified yet. I would like to have, an upgrade for him at some point to another level, and then possibly after he gets certification in a few years, move up to another level. So just for your consideration.
We take an advisement. Do you have, or we're looking for this year's grant list? Did you, Michael, you asked for, do you have it finalized?
Yeah. What do you have questions?
No, it was more that we weren't sure where the number, if there was any stuff still through litigation that was going to reduce it, appeals.
We had a big one with Medtronics that we settled earlier in the year, it was last year, and that was significant, and it affected, what they're paying significantly, but we were able to negotiate terms so that it was a lesser reduction up front, and it increased as we go through the life of the reval. That's the only one that's really large right now. And we've still got a few, but they're all very small.
Okay. Any questions?
So is the grant list finalized, Gary?
Yes.
Okay, can that be distributed to the board?
Yeah.
He's gonna.
He's going to, I just wanted to see if there's anything major.
Yeah.
And Gary, the cost to upgrade to an assistant assessor roughly?
It's in the packet. 15 you were looking, was it?
Well, the 15,000 is what we saved by him doing the
That was
inspections.
savings, right?
No, yeah, but there was a.
But I would say, I don't know. I don't know, what was it, like $5,000?
That's the
Initially.
savings.
Oh, that's the savings, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, that's right.
Yeah,
think
I'm
it's
sure
five?
it's not something I really was prepared to,
Yeah,
I don't have those
okay.
exact
No,
numbers,
that's
but
Anything
it's
else?
probably not in that territory
Okay.
for the initial step.
Yep.
Anything else for the assessor?
No, thank you for maintaining the vision in GIS systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Stacy?
Good evening.
Stacy's online.
Stacy's online?
Well, your data's online.
I've always been online.
Yeah.
Since I've been in office.
Again, you had very little changes in your line items per se. You want to?
The only significant increase was just the postage, which is not just postage, it's actually the whole taxation system. It's just been named postage for the longest time. What isn't part of my request, because it's not part of the general fund and the actual budget process, is I do hope that my, this is directed at Ed and of course members of the Board of Finance, that my little line item for records management from the dollar fund is funded as it has been in the last few years, which again, okay. It's not part of the general fund, it's part of the town clerk dollar fund, but it's not here and I didn't want it to be forgotten. Otherwise, I have nothing else to note except for the huge success of the online copy revenue for the town clerk's office. We have the town clerk records available for a fee. You can, subscribe. And we hadn't had that in the past. You'd actually have to come into the office, and this was started last year. And so far, since we started it in April, it's done very well, in excess of $7,000, which is a lot of money for copy fees. On the downside, we get a lot less traffic, and I've got a lot of complaints from title searchers because they're losing their jobs, but, it is what it is. But it has been a success, and I have some good projects coming up, and I'll be using my records management money for that. And I also got a plus, recently found out that the state will be awarding the town an increased
grant. It's a non-competitive grant that we're allowed to have each year. We've been reclassified, so as Mike Frieda knows, we've been classified to the second tier, which instead of around $3,000, it's around $6,000, actually $6,500. So I'm able to use that to help with the cost of records management, et cetera, the town clerks and the tax collector's office as well. So that's a plus. Any questions on either of my budgets?
Board members, any questions?
If not,
Thank you, Stacy.
Stacy, I do have, there was 15 in and out in there for that fund.
thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Chief and Deputy Chief and Chairman. Even yours is pretty clean cut, except for the capital, but
I didn't think you would expect anything different from us. But,
one of my favorite departments.
good evening, and thank you for staying around for us. As in the past, we'd like to thank you and the town people for supporting the police department and law enforcement, providing us the funds that we think are necessary to provide the public safety that's necessary here in North Haven. I think what you'll do is, if you look at our proposed budget, at least the operating part of it, you'll find that it's lean. I think it's very responsible. There's you'll see that there's just a couple of adjustments there. Those are contractually driven. 5 of those lines are contractually driven as of July 1. The other 41 lines have remained unchanged. Before moving forward, I also want to take the opportunity to thank some of the town people that actually came out overwhelmingly supporting us with our referendum last year for our radio project and also our building project. There's been some chatter recently, I guess, in town here and there with different pockets of people that, I don't know where they get their source of their information, that the project is either, we're running over cost and over budget, and that it's a mess, but it's not. I could tell everybody right now that's not the case. We're on target. We were roughly 2.5 months behind schedule. Part of the delay was some things that popped up. We had some contaminated soil issues that needed to be addressed. We had some issues as far as the proper water pressure that would be needed in the building. Issues as to proper gas pressure that would be needed in the building. As well as the creep that comes with every phase of building some type of a project. We had to keep tailoring it and bringing it back. We're not only committed to staying on budget, we're going to be on budget. In the end, we have we're gonna be there, and we'll probably be able to give you a couple of cents. We'll give you 50 cents back. How's that?
I've never seen you exceed anything any of your budgets.
It's going to be
I'm sure the project-
there's some chatter, and I don't know where it started. We're good. One of the things that Ed and the first selectman were very, very big on from the get-go was to hire an owner's rep, and we did that. So I have to give them credit for that, because he's been well worth the money spent. He's keeping us in line, and he's a good advocate for not only us but for the town.
That's good.
So, and that project, as of today, we're actually given a return to the building date as of February 5 of next year, which is kind of unusual. I think it's probably going to be more like an April 1. date, but that's good timing.
For partial utilization or
All.
full? All.
Yeah.
How's the communications? I mean, I know we got a
Communications,
little off topic.
I've actually heard some people say it's better than it was before. We've had some great luck with that. But again, our operational budget, it's at a 2.2% increase, and again, those are contractually driven. Capital request, we have included our usual capital request. I don't know if it's something that you would continue to have or you would like to have. These are the repeat line items in the capital. If you desire to keep them there, then we will. If you want to move them into a separate line item, we could do that as well. That's, police vehicles, the light bar and siren package, the laptops, the body armor. The
What is
one
it? LPR reader?
The LPR reader is, that's the license plate reader. We would like to purchase one. We think it's beneficial as far as reading and recording license plates and identifying not only motor vehicle violations as far as unregistered motor vehicles and that sort, but stolen vehicles and wanted persons as well. In light of a lot of the cars that have been entered in the past 18 months, not only in the town of North Haven, but throughout the state of Connecticut, having an LPR, I think, would likely help us identify cars that are driving through town at 2 o'clock in the morning, say on Washington Avenue. If you put the vehicle with the LPR on a main road, you're gonna get hits on, and most of these crimes of opportunities of unlocked vehicles, they're being committed by individuals that are later found to be in stolen cars. We know that because the cars are dropped and other cars are stolen.
So Chief, is this one reader that gets mounted in a car? Is it handheld, something you move around?
This would be mounted on one particular vehicle. It'd be, usually it's mounted on the trunk, and there's a laptop that it's constantly picking up data.
Yeah.
As far as, and again, I had put in for the 4 vehicles. I know the past couple of years we had gone to 2, we've gone to 2, we've gone to 2. It's coming to a point where we're catching up to the cycles of trying to get newer vehicles out there.
So how old are your oldest vehicles?
The oldest one, I think, is 09 that we just got rid of, so probably 2010.
And I'm sure the mileage is really high.
The miles are high.
And the point is really not even mileage because they're idling for so long.
Yeah, they're idle, yes.
It's like the
Yes.
mail trucks. You
Yeah.
can buy a mail truck with 24,000
Yeah.
miles. It's
Yeah.
engine's been running for 24 years.
Right. Speaking of vehicles on the capital request as far as the animal control officer, that vehicle
Yeah.
there is, we've been down this road before.
Excuse me for 1 second. And I didn't see it in the capital request. Did I miss it? I seen it in their proposal. I didn't see it in the, was it page 38?
Yeah.
I didn't see it there.
That vehicle itself is 10 years old, has over 140,000 miles on it, and that in itself is a specialty vehicle. When it goes down for repairs, we're pretty much out of luck.
What kind of, I mean, I think I've seen it, but I mean, what's it, just have cages in it and that kind of?
It's a van. It's a Chevy Express van. It's a 2008, and it has equipment. It does have cages and that sort in there. But again, we can't very well go out and lease or rent a vehicle and then return it because it drives around with dead animals in it. They pick up everything, roadkill.
Public Works doesn't do that?
Public Works doesn't pick up anything except for the large deer. The animal control officer picks up the skunks, the raccoons, the kittens, the dogs,
Yeah.
anything else, birds, ducks. They pick them all up. And you can't turn around and go to Enterprise and say, hey, listen, we need to borrow a truck and then bring it back to them. So, I mean, these are specialty vehicles. It's 10 years old. It has no value to it other than for us to perhaps keep it as a spare at that point.
Yeah.
So that's something that really needs to be addressed. The new personnel item, back in 2014, we had come forward and we had discussed our issue with the dispatchers, and we went with 4 part-time dispatchers. We were allocated funds for part-time work. Unfortunately, these folks have full-time employment elsewhere. And most of the time, it's with either another police department as a dispatcher, AMR as a dispatcher. One is actually a firefighter in another town. They're state-certified telecommunicators, and quite honestly, they have a commitment to their primary employer. We're kind of like the second person, They just, when they come in, when they can. We're not really at that level anymore. Day shift and your evening shift, you really need to have 2 dispatchers. And I would like to see if we can at all, move in that direction. These are folks that you can't just have one anymore.
Yeah.
So what happens if somebody, since we have the 4 full-time, if somebody calls out?
They replace them on overtime. Right. Yeah.
So
And
Chief,
there's-
Does that necessarily interfere with, well, it could with their other jobs, they all have other jobs?
Well, no, the full-time
Full-time?
dispatchers
How
are the
many
ones that we
full-time?
would, there's 4.
4 full-time.
There's 4 full-timers, and it's been like that since, probably since Christ was a foot soldier. I mean, it's been like that since I've been around. And when they book off sick, then you have to hire and replace them. Or if they take a vacation day or personal day, whatever it is. So they are replaced one for one.
You don't replace with a sergeant or anything because, or you do with.
You could, if push comes to shove.
That's your backup emergency final step.
There are patrol officers and supervisors that are state-certified telecommunicators. And we don't like to do that.
It takes an officer off the road.
Takes an officer off, the supervisor off the road.
Take somebody off the road, and we don't like to do that. And
We
you're
like
also paying a
cross-training.
higher wage in the replacement, so that's, in the all better world, there should be 2 days, 2 evenings, just to get it done. I think that's where we are.
And Chief, is there savings? So would you retain the 4 part-timers, or?
Well, I think if you could probably retain 2 of them.
Yeah.
We're in contract negotiations right now with the dispatchers, so we can't really discuss too much about the scheduling
Yeah.
of that, but that's something that I've offered or tried to get to go through. We're still talking about that. But I think that with an added full-time dispatcher working a modified shift, that these folks work. They work a 5-2, 5-3. If they work a modified 5-2, 5-3, it's very possible you could cut the overtime that's on the midnight shift every 5th day. When somebody has 2 days off, there's a need to replace somebody. 5 days, the 3rd day, they come around and they have to be replaced again. So there is some thought to it actually being a savings on that end.
Right.
Any questions for the chief?
Well, he comes in once a year, so I have to, say that from this side of the table, your department is extremely
The
well
best
managed.
run, it seems like.
I'm just really proud that you're part of the town that we're from. Your budget is reasonable, it's thorough, it handles, all the situations that you encounter, and as far as performance goes, I mean, you have the right mix of enforcement and discretion. You're great public safety officers. I'm just incredibly proud to have you as representing the police department of our town. So, thank you. Thank you very much. And I have one favor to ask, though.
Oh.
I don't know if you.
There's always a favor.
Yeah, I don't know if you control all the traffic devices in town, but there is a sensor that's not working at the end of Pool Road where it connects with Maple. If you could just fix that sensor.
Is it coming out of, you're coming out of Maiden Avenue?
I'm coming off of, is it Warren, Spring?
Yes. Spring to Layton.
Yeah.
And what you have to do is you have to inch up and you have to actually.
No, that sensor works.
Oh.
That sensor's fine.
Okay.
It's the one on the end of Pool Road.
Well, that's a state. That's a state.
The one right at that same intersection at the end of Pool Road. It has never worked in 10 years.
Maple Avenue, State Street.
That's our light.
I mean, Pool Road and Maple Avenue. That's a state road.
Yeah.
State road, but it's our light.
Oh, I don't know, they just put up the one that got banged.
That's what I'm saying, it's our light, we had to pay for it.
So that's,
I
think he'll take care of it.
It's on a 30-second timer right now. Just get it back to the sensor
Yeah.
function, and thank you.
Yeah.
Did anyone else have anything else for Chief?
Yeah, I just have
Give
a
him whatever he
question.
wants.
So like.
You want a
the-
fifth card?
So the storage for the body cams and recorders and everything, I see it's all level. So is that what you
That's
have
paid.
for storage is good, like you're not overrunning it? I know storage is.
Yeah,
sometimes
that's a, we're locked into that payment.
You're locked into it.
And that's locked in for 5 years, so we have 4 more years left.
So you're getting a deal then because
Yeah.
storage keeps.
Actually, it's really a benefit. The body cameras, I know some people were apprehensive. I was a little apprehensive in the beginning.
Yeah, I remember when you brought them in
Yeah.
and we got to play with them a little
Yeah,
bit.
and I think what we're finding out is the officers have embraced them quite quicker than we actually thought, and to a point where they don't want to leave the station without them. It's like having the full story on, instead of getting the 30-second, WTNH clip.
Yeah.
Which could be skewed. You're going to get the 3-minute or 5-minute version, which is going to be the whole story.
And by the way, the extra dispatchers you're requesting, that's not in your line
No.
item budget at this
No.
time?
No.
It's a proposal.
It's a
Okay.
proposal.
Yeah.
And I will say, just as when you asked for an officer a few years back, we normally take what you ask a little bit more seriously because of the way you've managed your budget.
Yeah.
I think board members really feel that you wouldn't ask for it unless it was critical.
So we don't think the state should penalize North Haven, and we don't think that you as a department should be penalized for the great way in which you run your department.
Just to make another comment, and I don't know if you people are aware, but the North Haven Police Department, along with myself, which started this with the chief and the deputy, we started with a special program that it's a national program, and the North Haven Police Department had one of 16 police departments in the state of Connecticut that are now our certified accredited department. The chief went down to Florida to pick up the paperwork, and we've been accredited. And this took us about 5 or 6 years.
It took a couple of years. We just had to get the right people in the right place.
But it took us, and we were accredited. It's quite an honor to be one of 16 towns in the state of Connecticut that we are. What does CALEA stand for?
It's the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies.
So I'm very proud of that there.
As we are, we appreciate your command structure.
Thank you,
Appreciate your
It should
budget.
save you some money, I think, somewhere too. And that's what they tell us anyway, as
Yeah.
far as our liability insurance.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good to hear.
We are adjourned.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the Town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.